Hello, thank you for listening. My name is Silas Croft, but most folks then and now just call me Ridge. I want to tell you a story from a time when I was just 26 years old. Before the war, my world was measured in ridgelines and creek beds. Back in Hollow Creek, West Virginia, the woods taught you everything you needed to know. They taught you patience, waiting for a buck to break cover. They taught you logic, reading a track line in the mud. They taught you a kind of quiet reverence. The forest had its own laws, older than any man's. A language spoken in the rustle of leaves, the scent of damp earth and pine, the cold, clear taste of spring water. It was a language of survival, sure, but it was also one of balance. You took only what you needed. You respected the cycles. You understood your place. I was a hunter, a trapper. My life was a conversation with the wild. Then in 1944, they gave me a rifle with a scope on it and sent me to a forest that spoke a different language entirely. It was a language of steel and screams and the unnatural silence that follows. People talk about why they fought, for freedom, for country. I suppose that was part of it for me too, but deep down I was fighting what I saw as a blight, an invasive species that cared nothing for balance, that wanted to poison the wild heart of the world. I thought I could hunt it, I thought I understood the rules, but the Hürtgen Forest, it had no rules. And for 3 days it showed me that the most dangerous thing in any woods isn't the bear or the wolf. It's the man who has forgotten he is one. The memory starts not with a sound, but with a feeling, a deep, gut-thrumming vibration that came up through the soles of my boots, through the mud, and into my bones. Before the sound even hit, the world shook itself apart. The Germans called their big guns screaming memes, but this was different. This was the earth itself gargling thunder. One moment I was crouched behind a fallen log, my knuckles white on the stock of my Springfield, the smell of wet wool and gun oil filling my nostrils. Lieutenant Miller was 10 feet to my left, his mouth open, yelling something lost to the roar. The next moment the log, the lieutenant, the whole world was just gone, replaced by a geyser of black earth, splintered wood, and a hot, wet spray that I prayed was only mud and rain. The world went white, then black. Then a ringing, high-pitched whine, like a million cicadas screaming inside my skull. I was on my back, my helmet gone, the perpetual, miserable drizzle of the Hürtgen kissing my face. The air, thick and heavy seconds before, was now thin and sharp with the taste of cordite. It burned the back of my throat. Around me, the forest was a mangled ruin. The ancient pines, the ones that had stood since before America was a country, were ripped open, their white innards exposed like bone. They called it a tree burst when a shell exploded in the canopy. It turned every branch, every splinter of wood into a wooden razor, deadlier than shrapnel. The forest floor was littered with them, and with things that used to be men. My training kicked in, a numb automatic response. Check yourself, fingers, toes, wiggle them good, check weapon. The Springfield was still slung on my shoulder, the stock cracked but functional. Check unit. I pushed myself up, my head swimming. The ringing slowly subsided, replaced by a new sound, moaning, and a single distinct popping sound. Small arms fire, close. The sharp crack of a Car 98K, not the deeper cough of our Garens, the wrong sound, the enemy's sound. I crawled low, my belly sinking into the cold, stinking mud that was the Hürtgen's skin. It was a mulch of rotted leaves, pine needles, and months of blood. I peered through a shattered stump. What was left of my platoon was pinned down, caught in a crossfire. An MG-42, somewhere up the ridge, was tearing the world apart with a sound like ripping canvas. Our boys were trying to fall back, but they were retreating into open ground. A slaughter. I saw bodies jerk and lie still. I saw a medic go down, his white armband a perfect, terrible target. My soldier's mind screamed. Engage, support your men, you're a sniper. Find that machine gun nest. But another voice, an older, deeper one, whispered something else. It was the voice of the trapper, the voice of the ridge runner from back home. The herd is spooked, fleeing into the open. A fool's death, go to ground, melt away. Wait, another artillery shell landed, closer this time. The concussion slapped me flat. This time when the dirt settled, there was only silence. No more Garens, no more moaning, just the steady, indifferent drip of water from the mutilated trees. And then voices, guttural, German. They were sweeping the field. I pressed myself into the earth, pulling my collar up, trying to make my olive-drab uniform disappear into the browns and blacks of the forest floor. I didn't breathe. A pair of jackboots squelched in the mud not 5 feet from my head. I could smell the cheap tobacco on the man's breath. I watched them through my eyelashes, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. They were checking bodies. A bayonet thrust here, a kick there. They passed me by. I was just another lump of mud and shadow, for now. When they were gone, I stayed there for what felt like a lifetime, letting the cold seep into me, letting my breathing slow to the rhythm of the dripping rain. The soldier, Silas Croft, was gone, dead back there with his platoon. All that was left was Ridge. And Ridge knew one thing: he was in the wrong territory and the predators were all around him. For the next 3 days, time ceased to exist. There was only day gloom and night dark. I moved only when the wind was high, its sighing in the canopy loud enough to cover the sound of my movement. I didn't walk, I flowed. A foot placed here, my weight tested, then settled. My eyes weren't looking for soldiers anymore. They were looking for game trails, for water sources, for the subtle shifts in the foliage that meant a tripwire or a patrol route. My pre-war skills, honed in the Appalachians, came back not as a memory, but as pure instinct. I became a ghost. My stomach was a hollow ache. The deer rations were long gone. On the second day, I found a cluster of grubs under a rotting log. They were pale and fat. The soldier in me recoiled, but the hunter, the survivor, saw protein. I ate them raw. They tasted of earth and desperation. I remembered drinking from a clear, cold spring back home, the water so pure it felt like swallowing life itself. Here, I licked damp moss and drank from muddy shell craters, the water tasting of rust and death. Every sip was a gamble against sickness. I wasn't just hiding, I was watching. My mission was gone, my unit shattered, but I still had a purpose. I found a high point, a rocky outcrop disguised by a thicket of ferns, and I became part of it. From there I could see them, the Germans, not as monsters, but as a rival pack. They moved with a weary efficiency. I saw their supply lines, mule trains struggling through the mud. I saw where their mortars were dug in. I watched them huddle around small fires, their faces illuminated, young and scared, just like ours. I took out the small notebook from my breast pocket and started sketching. A crude map, an X for the mortars. A dotted line for the supply trail. A square for what looked like a command post hidden in a bunker. This was my new hunt, not for a man, but for information, the most dangerous prey of all. On the third morning, a young German soldier, no older than 16, came to relieve himself near my hiding spot. He was alone. His rifle was slung over his shoulder. He stood there looking up at the gray sky, his guard completely down. My Springfield was in my hands. The crosshairs of my unertl scope settled right over the center of his chest. It was a perfect shot. A 500-yard shot I could make in my sleep. The soldier in me knew the math. The windage, the drop, squeeze, don't pull. But the hunter hesitated, not out of mercy, not really. It was calculus, the logic of the wild. A shot means noise, noise means a search means my position is compromised. My information, my map is lost. This kill, it wasn't worth the risk. It was a bad trade. In the woods, you don't spook the whole forest just to take one squirrel. I lowered the rifle. I watched the boy finish, oblivious, and walk back to his post. In that moment, the line between me and them, between hunter and hunted, blurred into nothing. We were all just creatures trapped in this rotten, dying forest, trying to survive another day. That night, I made my move. A storm was rolling in, the wind picking up, the rain turning from a drizzle to a downpour. Nature was giving me my cover. I used the map I'd made, my memory of their patrols, and my own instincts to slip through their lines. It was a slow, agonizing crawl through darkness and mud, my nerves screaming with every snap of a twig, every rustle of a leaf that wasn't made by the wind. I crossed a creek, the icy water a shock that nearly made me cry out, but it washed away my scent. I thought of baptisms back home, in the cool waters of the Elk River. This felt like the opposite. A washing away of my humanity, leaving only the animal behind. Hours later, I stumbled into an American outpost. I was a scarecrow of mud and torn wool. I must have looked like a wild man. A rifle was shoved in my face. I didn't even have the strength to raise my hands. I just croaked one word, Ivy, the password, the name of our division. A sergeant lowered his weapon, his eyes wide. He didn't see a soldier. He saw something that had crawled out of the belly of the forest. I handed him my notebook, the pages warped and stained with mud and rain. Mortars, I mumbled, my voice a dry rasp. Command post supply trail, then I collapsed. I went back to West Virginia after the war, went back to the woods. I thought I could find that quiet reverence again, that simple conversation, but it was gone. The forest's language had changed for me, or maybe I had just learned more of its vocabulary. I'd be tracking a deer, and the familiar sight of a game trail would suddenly look like a German patrol route. The snap of a twig wouldn't just mean a squirrel. For a split second, it was a boot on a branch. I would look at the deep, peaceful shadows under the pines and see a place to hide, a place to kill. The Hürtgen had put its roots down inside me. It taught me that the forest isn't good or evil. It's just a place of deep, absolute indifference. It doesn't care who wins or who dies. It just endures, and it remembers the blood that soaks its soil. The most unnatural thing in all of creation is us, what we do to each other, what we do to the world. People ask how you survive something like that. The truth is, a part of you doesn't. You bury it, but the ground is never deep enough. The hardest lesson, the one I learned in the dark, is this. In a war, you think you're fighting the enemy, but the real fight, the one that stays with you, is the one against the part of yourself that is willing to become a beast to stay alive. And sometimes, you're not sure which side won. This memory is a dark corner of that forest I carry. It's heavy. Help me carry it. Subscribe and ensure these stories are never lost in the undergrowth of time.